Welcome back. Well, the Democratic Alliance has acknowledged President Cyril Ramaphosa's address on the crisis in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, but DA leader John Steenhuisen insists that Ramaphosa must clean up his cabinet. He joins us now to elaborate on this further. John, always a pleasure to have you this evening. Well, we saw President Cyril Ramaphosa during his address last night acknowledging that indeed they were ill-prepared as government to face the protests and subsequent looting that we saw over the past few days. The violence did not have to get to that level, and that for them was perhaps a short sight. In your opinion, is that good enough to acknowledge indeed that there were some mishaps on behalf of government, or could he have done more?
I think it was very good of the President to acknowledge the shortcomings instead of trying to tough it out and pretend that nothing had gone wrong, when very clearly something had gone wrong. And it's very, very good that he's done so. But there have to be consequences that follow this. This has been a week that has shaken South Africa to its foundation. And having been on the ground and seen the fear and the desperation of people who felt completely abandoned by the security services and left to fend for their own, I think that there has to be some political accountability. That's how democracies work. Those responsible for those ministries that let South Africans down, both the intelligence services as well as the police services, I think need to do the right thing and be held accountable. If this had happened in other democracies, you would have seen the ministers tendering their resignation, particularly after the President last night had admitted that their departments had failed in the way that they've done and have cost billions of rands, lost 212 lives and shattered the lives of many, many of our citizens in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng.
So according to you, the right thing to do at this point would be for President Cyril Ramaphosa to fire the intelligence chief, Ayanda Dlodlo, as well as Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, at this point?
I would believe that is the right thing to do. That is what's called political accountability. It's not good enough for ministers to stand on podiums and take the credit when credit is due, but to shirk the responsibility. Democratic accountability demands that when you mess up and things don't go well, and when it has such a profound cost as it has had here, that is the right thing to do, to show South Africans that you've taken on board the seriousness of the failures and that you're determined to fix them. The security services cluster, and particularly intelligence, has been in turmoil for many, many years. The Mufamadi report that was tabled at the President's request has still not been actioned, and we're living with a domestic intelligence service that completely failed us. I mean, you didn't need to be James Bond to be able to read what was happening on social media and see the messages and the threats last week that were given by the RET faction, particularly outside Mr. Zuma's homestead. Why then there was no preparation, no boots on the ground, no equipment to be able to deal with what happened in KwaZulu-Natal this week is simply unforgivable. Yeah. And I think that there does need to be accountability. And I think the President has stood up, right, as he should have, and said, yes, we've dropped the ball. But as we saw a couple of months ago in the Netherlands, when Mr. Rutte's government messed up with the way they did, there were resignations. And I really think that we've got to start a new era of political accountability in South Africa where we hold those accountable.
Well, also, the Democratic Alliance, as well as other opposition leaders, held a meeting with government this week, and I believe you yourself were in KZN just to see exactly what the situation looks like on the ground. Was any accountability as well as any intelligence and progress given to members of the opposition regarding the investigations that are pending? Do we know of the names of those people that have been arrested, as more than that we've been given as the media? And what has been said around a cohesive and a collective strategy to ensure that this country is rebuilt as soon as this dust settles?
Yeah, well, I think the meeting was a very constructive one, and as I'm usually quite critical of the President, but I'm going to give him credit here. He did listen, and we were able to put on the table a 9-point plan. There were no names shared with us, but it was very clearly made to us that there are rogue elements in state security who they were investigating, and a number of other senior people in particularly KwaZulu-Natal who are going to be looked into. One of the things that I suggested as part of the 9-point plan I tabled with the President was to get the intelligence services onto the WhatsApp groups, onto social media, so that we'd be able to get a handle on the ringleaders and be able to nip that in the bud and stop the coordination that we've seen happening over the last week. And it was coordinated. And for the 2 days that I was on the ground, 2.5 days I was on the ground, there was very little coordination between the security services, and they had lost the initiative, which is why the looting reached the scales that it did and the violence was able to escalate in the way that it did. It was terrible for me to walk down a street with 7 bodies lying strewn on the streets. These are not sights that we're expecting to see in a democratic, law-abiding country.
Yeah, and as you're speaking about how there seems to have been a lack of cohesiveness within the way that the departments and the security cluster was communicating with each other, from what you've also witnessed this past week with interaction with government, would you say that the president has got control and authority within his own government, within his own executive?
I would think that he does, but the problem lies within his own party. And we mustn't forget that this was essentially an internal ANC battle that spilt over onto the streets of South Africa and then found fertile fuel in the poverty, the unemployment and the dispossession that so many of our citizens suffer on a daily basis and continue to suffer. So, I think that the problem is that he's got to rein the people in his own party in. It's not good enough to have the Durban mayor, on the day the violence starts and breaks out, putting Facebook messages about support for Zuma. It's not good enough to have people in your party who are actively promoting and supporting the looting that was going on. So I think the president's I think he's got authority in government, and that's vested in him in terms of the Constitution. I think he's got to get the elements in his party under control and to start preventing it from spilling over into internal party battles that spill over and then harm South Africa.
John, we'll leave it there for this evening. Thank you so much for your time. DA leader John Steenhuisen giving us the insights of the Democratic Alliance, saying that indeed the Police Minister Peggy Cele as well as the Intelligence Chief Ayanda Hlodlo should be fired.